Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is a wicked little mini bike. I don't know about you guys, but one of the only things that I despise about installing a centrifugal clutch is the fact that I probably have to take it off the output shaft sometime in the future. I'm not a big fan of breaking out the tools of persuasion, so I'm going to attempt to modify it. I already started a little bit, and it's not much that I'm doing. If we try to stick this on, it kind of sort of goes, but then it kind of sort of doesn't at the same time. That means it's going to go on, but it's going to kind of sort of not come off at the same time. Same thing if I spin it around. It'll get to a certain point, and then it'll start to bind up. Any more than that, and that bad boy would have been coming out. Not a huge deal. You just hold constant pressure against it and give it a few bumps. This is what I did. I grabbed my Dremel with a slightly worn out sanding barrel. That way it wasn't overly aggressive. I reached in and I lightly addressed the inside bore. I'm going to do just a little bit more and see if I can get this thing to slide a little bit easier. I pretty much ran it until I wore that barrel slap out. I'm not sure if I actually polished the bore or if I just did a really bang up job removing the surface contaminants that were there. But either way, here's our result. Clutch goes on, and you can see I can't just pull it off. We're hugging that bore, but I can get it off a lot easier than I would have been able to if I had shoved it on there before. I think it goes on just as easy in the other direction. Yep, it's on, and then it comes out. It gets a little bit on the end, but swish, there it is. You're really going to dig this once it all makes sense, that is. I'm going to show you exactly how I mount my max torque clutch on the output shaft. I start with a 3/4 inch shim. It goes all the way on, followed by a 3/4 inch inside diameter 5/16 spacer. After that, the clutch. Line up the keyway. All right. And now I get my key in there. Keys in. This is a pilot washer from a 30 series torque converter. It is also keyed. This is going to go on just like a shaft extension. It'll lock onto the key, and the bolt and lock washer will lock it onto the shaft. That's awesome. But we don't want the key to fall out. I'm now going to take another 3/4 shim, and I'll stick that right on the pilot washer. Now, when this goes on and everything's tight, the key can't fall out. This spacer and this shim works out perfectly for this pilot washer and shim in the front. When this is tight, the clutch won't be able to wiggle side to side. That's positive placement, brother. I just pulled out my modified pilot washer to make sure that I have enough threads coming through. Line that back up and get the hand tightened first. And now I'll grab my wrench. I'm using a 1/4 inch black oxide hex cap bolt. These are very strong. Snug it up. All right. And I already have my starter removed so that I can get onto my flywheel nut. Make sure that's on tight with a ratchet. Kind of a weird view, but see what's going on. I'm on my flywheel nut, okay? I'm going to push the ratchet or spin it so that it's going to lock up against my foot peg. I don't think it'll fall. On this side, I have a torque wrench set up, and we are at 20 foot-pounds. I carefully try to do this. Oh, I think I have the other ratchet on backwards. Hold on. Okay. There we go. That ratchet is locked up against the foot peg. And there is our 20 foot-pounds. That clutch isn't going anywhere. Don't worry, I didn't get way out ahead of you and cut this chain to size yet. It's just held on by a zip tie. We're going to go over one of the most important features on this mini bike, and that is going to be the chain tensioning system, because we not only need a tensioner, but we're also going to need an idler wheel. We have to correct the geometry of the path that this chain is on right now. When you engage the clutch and you start to go forward, the top chain gets tight. What happens to the bottom chain? it sags, right? When that's sagging, it's also going to be wagging. And you don't want that to happen as it's returning onto the sprocket in the rear. That's how you end up with things flying off when they shouldn't be. I'm going to show you how we're going to fix that. Allow me to introduce to you the new block-mounted chain tensioner directly from the locally famous Grey Goat Garage. This is version 2.0. You might remember the first one. Bam! It was a little bit longer and it didn't have all the nice curves that this new one has. It's got a little bit of a different angle on the dangle. A new sweep back here. And it's even a little bit thinner. We're going to test that out. And just in case, we do have one with a little more girth to it. I'm going to show you how this works. I think they call these hex cap, and that one is a socket hex cap. Regardless, they're about 3/4 inches long. I'm going to be putting a lock washer and a washer on each one of them. These bolts are going to pass through these slots and we'll be threading into these two holes. I'm only finger tight on these bolts so that we can check out the full adjustability of this bad thing. This is quite the setup we're working with here. Remember, we're sitting on that billet plate, so that's working in our favor too. Right now, we're all the way forward. Push it back. Make sure I go all the way. And it looks like we're well over a 1/2 inch on the slots. Maybe another 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. So between the two, we're just about 2 inches of adjustability that we can use to add tension to the chain. We also have 7 holes on the tail end, and that's going to be where we mount the idler. Those holes are used to change the path of the chain. You can come up or you can go down. I think we're going to be using this hole right here. I don't have any obstacles to contend with, but if I had a cross member, you could move it around so that the chain doesn't hit it when you go under it. Looks like this came with 2 washers and a lock nut on the end. I'm just going to give this a shot. Originally I thought I was going to have to space it out, but if I hold that, let's see if I can get the nut off. The ball bearings are so smooth it makes it hard to spin the nut off the bolt with one hand anyway. Alright, if we take this and we place it on the face of the tensioner, we'll call that the bracket, and we look at the sprocket, okay, that's pretty much going to tell us where the chain is. If we come out a couple washers, off of that face, we're pretty close to the center of that clutch sprocket. I think I'm going to let it fly and see what happens. I have plenty of threads coming through, so I can add a washer or two if I have to. Piece of steel tubing. This is wicked straight. It's also quite rigid. Placing it up against the back of the sprocket. I'm then running it up against my crankcase cover. When I pull this flush to my sprocket, it'll come off the crankcase cover, and I'm trying to get it so that it falls just along the back side of the clutch sprocket. Once it does that, I look at the space between the tube and the crankcase cover. Move to the other side of the output shaft, and I'm looking at that same space. It looks pretty even. So if our chain goes from that sprocket to this sprocket in the rear, chances are it's going to be pretty close to straight right now. Get that out of the situation, and I'll get my temporary chain back on there. The chain is actually staying on by itself this time around. Might be a sign that we're heading in the right direction. We are extremely close to being perfectly straight. I'm just going to clear on that exhaust. Here's where we're sitting on our idler wheel. We have plenty of real estate on the back side of it, but we're kind of just barely catching the front. It's nothing crazy. I'll try. It's not going to move a lot. That's going to go in. I'll try a couple washers and see where we're at. If I go any more than that, I'm probably going to have to use a longer bolt. Personally, I prefer these metal Coleman idler wheels, but let's face it, not everybody has one of these kicking around, so let's just stick with the original game plan. Sort of. I did switch the bolt out for the one that was in this wider idler. They're both bearing style and they're the same size, so obviously it fit. The reason I did that was, well, see that fat stack back there? Oh yeah, I'm 6 deep, baby. That's 6 washers between the face of that bracket and the face of the bearing on the idler. I have plenty of threads. Kind of get you in focus. Yep. And get a nut on there all day. When everything is snugged up, even the idler, it looks pretty close to center. We're really going to have to bolt everything down and find out. That's where the genius of this thing comes in, because once we have the engine aligned and it's bolted down close to the tension we want on the chain, we just tighten it down and then we forget about it. We finish off the tension with this guy down here. You don't even have to remove the clutch either. We'll get to that. We still got to cut this chain. I'm going to tighten that bolt. Take one more look at this and make sure I'm 100% about my position, because once I move this engine and I do cut that chain, it's going to be where it is. So you got one shot there. I temporarily removed the header, and I have my steel tube propped up with some vice grips. These aren't particularly tight. They're just gently holding the tube flush with the face of the sprocket. That way, if I have to bend or pivot anything, I'm not forcing it. It'll just fall in its natural state. We can look at the tube in relation to the clutch, the sprocket, and the bell. They look pretty close. That gap looks the same. There is a little bit of wiggle though. So if we look at these 3 points on the side cover instead, those are all planed off the same. Pull out the trusty tape measure and we'll get right on there. So the face of the tube looks like we're just over 3/4 inches. We'll check the one in the back. It's about the same. And we'll hit the center just to put the guarantee on it. Oh yeah, we're there. So right now, this engine is square to the sprocket. So is the chain, because we're, in the same place on that sprocket. So no matter what, the chain's going to be straight. Now we got to decide if we want the engine to go back or if we want it to go forward. And we have one thing that gets in the way. That's the header. We'll remove this vice grip and get our header back in the game. We'll hold it flush to the gasket. Oh boy, we're getting close there. Looks like I already scratched the frame. That's all right. I think we're gonna have to cover that up with some heat tape. If I come back, all right, I'm definitely going to vibrate off the side of it. I'm just missing it as it is. Can I move this over? Yup. I would have to remove some material off of that shaft extension piece and then take whatever I remove from there off the back side here. We're real close to showing you why I don't do that, all right? Remember, I'm thinking ahead. So, if the engine comes back, it's going to hit. We're going to leave it right where it's at. We're going to leave it in the forward position. I'm going to tighten the engine down. We have 1.5 inches of adjustment with that block mounted unit. As long as we can get close enough on the links on the chain, that's going to give us plenty. Let's see what happens. I just went around and tightened all 4 of the nuts that hold the block onto the billet plate. The 4 on the bottom are still loose, so it can move back and forth. And there is a little wiggle that can take you out of square, so I also have my tube back in place so I can get everything straight before I attempt to loop the chain around again. I have the bolt and the nut all snugged up on the idler wheel. I'm not overly tight. so that I'm impinging those bearings. We want this thing to spin freely. I went ahead and cut the excess off my chain so that I don't have to guess. My master link is just loose. I have the tensioner pushed all the way forward. The engine's where I want it. And now I'm going to figure out how many links I can take out of this. As of right here, right now, I think I would be comfortable coming back at least one. So I'm just going to do one at a time. I want to get this perfect. I don't want to take too many and then risk having to pull the engine back and then figure out that exhaust situation. Good luck with that. We'll keep going with this. One link at a time. I got it on there all right. The tensioner is all the way forward, so it's just working as an idler right now. And there is the master link. We're connected. Still a little loose up top. Feels good down below. I'm going to eyeball that chain perfectly straight, and hopefully when I tighten those 4 bolts on the bottom, everything will work out. Meaning that header isn't going to hit the frame. Here it goes. I tightened everything, and then I went around and I made sure it was tight again. Yeah, buddy. That's nice. Now, just gonna see if that header's gonna go back on. A fresh gasket. I'll take a stab at that, and then we're going to tighten those bolts way back there. Yes, sir. It's close, but it's really nowhere near touching. If you look from behind, you can see we almost have a 1/4 inch there. So, you'd really have to do something weird. Probably lean the bike over and bend it if you wanted to hit that frame. It's not going to do that just vibrating with that much space. It is close, and it is going to get hot, so I will be heat taping that. Now, I'm going to show you why I spaced that clutch out so much. We're going to tighten those bolts, and it's a lot easier to do it once you know where everything's going to go. You can just set your tension. In this case, we don't have to. We're just using it for an idler right now. But everything else is bolted in place. Why mess around, right? Just move your tensioner. Bam. Tighten your bolts. Be done with it. How are we going to get back there? Well, right here. That's a stubby Allen's wrench, and it fits those bolts. I just reach back and I turn it. If we used the thicker bracket that I showed you, where would the heads of those bolts be? Even closer to that clutch. They also get closer to the chain, where I'm running in ROV gold, and it's a little bit wider. I like to have the extra space to ensure that the chain can't wobble into the bolt. That's also why we used those nice streamlined hex cap jobs. Beautiful. I'm going to tighten those up, and I think we're going to be done for now. I'm just tightening these real good. I'm not using any Teflon or Loctite right now. I have a washer and a lock washer. See the lock washer up against the bracket. I don't think this is going to move. Hopefully the chain will stretch slightly, and this is going to be more of a permanent thing. I'll keep an eye on those bolts. If they loosen up, I'll address it. Probably some blue Loctite or a little Teflon or something. I don't want them to get stuck in there either. Whoops! I almost forgot the master link. I'm going to go over every nut and bolt on this mini bike. But then, we're going to be ready for a test ride. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. I want you to stay. I want you to stay. I want you to stay. I want you to stay.